Hello, everyone. We're here today with Judy Murray. Hi, Judy. First of all, how are you?
Yeah, no, I'm good, or as good as you can be in a global pandemic. We're very locked down in Scotland, and we have an awful lot of snow at the moment. I reckon I have about 1.5 feet in my garden. So yeah, it's not so easy. I'm going to go out and go out with my snow shovel later on. So that will be my exercise for the day. Will be trying to dig my car out and clear my drive.
Let's move on and talk about tennis and the Australian Open. Which are some of the players that have surprised you, or you think they're the favorites for the Australian Open this year?
Well, I think the first thing to say is I don't think anybody's going into this Australian Open with what they would call their perfect preparation for obvious reasons. So I think we've seen already in these first few days, there's been a number of upsets, there's been a number of injuries, and I think that is not surprising at all when you consider how many players had to go through the very hard quarantine. So you work hard to build up to a point to give yourself a chance to compete well in the majors. And, if you are then locked down for 2 weeks before you can get out and play, it's very easy to lose all that physical conditioning and preparation that you've built up because you can't get out, you can't train in the way that you would want to. So in lots of ways, the upsets and the injuries or the retirements haven't surprised me at all. And it's a shame. But of course, I know how grateful the players are to be able to compete. And I know the incredible logistical challenges and organizational planning that must have gone in for the event organizers to enable it to happen. I can only imagine how difficult a job that was and still is to negotiate that with all the rules and regulations that you have to abide by and trying to keep everybody safe, because Australia took such a hard line on coronavirus in order to eradicate it and has done so very successfully. So I mean, I think it's difficult to look past Novak. I think has such a great record there. The court surface is perfect for him. He looks to be in great shape coming into this. He's had a lot of a number of matches already with the ATP Cup, and I think it's always hard to look past him. I suppose I was thinking that it was an opportunity for some of the Aussies to shine, given that they've been in Australia. That most of them chose not to travel and play the tournaments during the pandemic. So I think on the women's side, I'd love to see Ash Barty win. I love the way that she plays. I love her attitude, her personality, very grounded, kind of multi-talented sportswoman. And of course, it's been a long, long time since Australia had a homegrown champion. So I think that would give everybody over there a massive, massive boost after a really tough year.
Of course, the situation for Andy wasn't so pleasant going into the Australian Open. How did things look from your point of view?
He unfortunately had a positive test and wasn't able to travel. And he has since gone to Italy to play in a challenger, because, the one thing that you cannot improve in training is your match fitness, your mental application. You can only get that by playing matches. So he's gone over to play a challenger in Italy, which he started in yesterday and got a win. It's a very strong challenger, of course, because anybody who hasn't gone to Australia is looking for matches and looking for tournaments to play in, and there are very few tournaments around the world at the moment for any players to compete in. So I think he's there for 2 weeks. There's back-to-back events there in Biella.
It's difficult to describe with words your emotions. Speaking of 2013 and Andy's triumph at Wimbledon, but tell us, what was it like for you?
Well, I think, Andy had been in the final the year before in 2012, and he'd lost to Federer, and then he had won a few weeks later on the same court in the Olympics against Federer. So I think, winning the Olympics and having been in a final, I think he was better prepared for 2013, probably emotionally or mentally, I would imagine. And I think I probably was as well, in the sense of I kind of knew what to expect. And I think I've told the story many times, but the player box at Wimbledon on the centre court is a mixed box, which means that the two players have 18 seats each in the same box. And so you are in there with the opposition family, coaching team and other supporters, and it is a very, very uncomfortable place to be when you're in a very tense situation like that. And so having suffered through the 2012 final, being surrounded, or that's what it felt like to me, being surrounded by the opposition, I took myself out of the player box and I moved several rows back from it in order to not have all that going on around me, because I find it incredibly stressful watching my kids play. And the worst stress, of course, is when there is a massive prize at stake. So any of the finals of majors, when it comes down to that point, are incredibly stressful. So I always sit on my own, or I try to sit on the end of a row so that I only have to sit beside one person, and I don't like anybody to talk to me. I don't talk to anybody, and everybody who knows me, that's in our circle, knows not to speak to me. Don't offer me a sweet or a drink. Just don't speak to me at all. So I really get into my zone. I rarely take my eyes off my kids on the court, and so I wish, like many of the things that have happened, wish that I could have enjoyed them more, but I can't. You can enjoy it when it's finished, but when it's finished, it's just, for me, 2013 was so much just about relief, because having seen how devastated Andy was after losing in 2012, I didn't want him to have to go through that again. And of course, you have no idea what the outcome is going to be in any tennis match or any final. So I think for me, it was just a huge, huge relief. I think to see him achieve the dream that he'd had since he was a little boy, and after everything that he'd gone through the year before, it was definitely relief, and probably was able to enjoy it a few days later when it had kind of all sunk in and everything had got a bit quieter. But it goes a bit hectic when you win something like that. The media circus kicks in and everybody wants a piece of you and so forth. So
and of course, a year later, speaking of 2014, there was the battle between Andy Murray and Grigor Dimitrov. What do you remember from it?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Grigor. Love the way that he plays. I remember when we first saw him and everybody was calling him baby fed, and huge things were expected of him, which he probably hasn't achieved as much as everybody thought that he would. And that's not to say that he hasn't achieved a great deal, because he has. He's been around the top end of the game for a long, long time. He's incredibly exciting to watch. But I love the way he plays. He's so stylish. But what I really love about him is off the court. He is exceptionally nice young man and incredible manners. Great, one of these guys that'll hold a door open for you, or you take your chair out before you sit down. Always stops to say hello. Always just a lovely, lovely guy to be around. He came to Scotland at very short notice one year to play Andy in his exhibition match in Glasgow, and Andy was supposed to play Gael Monfils, and Gael got injured, and Grigor stepped in at the last moment, and you know, he was at the venue all day doing the clinics, doing the media, and then they played the match at night, and everybody fell in love with him. He was so charming, and what a great advocate for your country and for tennis. Just, yeah, one of my favorite guys on the tour for sure.
And why do you think that so far we haven't seen him lifting a trophy such as the Grand Slam title?
I think, you know, I mean, if you look at who has won the Grand Slams on the men's side in the last, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years, it's hardly any players. It's like such a small number of players. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do. You know, you've got to win 7 matches across a 14-day period. They're best of 5 sets, and you're playing in the strongest era ever of men's tennis. And I think that you shouldn't be critical of the fact that he hasn't won a Grand Slam. I think you should be appraising of the fact that he has been around the top of the game for such a long time. You know, it's incredibly difficult to break through, you know, those Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, Murray. You know, if you looked at the semi-finals of the Grand Slams over the last 15 years, they were pretty much all in and around that, you know, you know, they dominated. They really dominated, and it was hard to break through. People mature at different rates, and you know, who knows? There's still time. That's all I'm saying.
And of course, there has been another Bulgarian. Speaking of Svetlana Pironkova, she reached the semis in 2010, more than 10 years ago now. What do you think of her? And even last year, she reached in the US Open. She did very well. What do you think? Is there emphasis on mothers in tennis?
There's definitely there are a lot more mothers on the road now than there have ever been, and of course with Serena and Vika, I guess especially as being, you know, world number ones and slam champions, the you know, the facilities or the environment that at the tournaments that allows you to travel with your children safely, and I think it will only continue to get better because of particularly Serena and Vika. You know, the tournaments will want to ensure that everything is in place that they need, and I only single them out because, you know, so often it is the players at the top who influence the big changes. So I think for Pironkova, I remember her game well from my years of doing Fed Cup because you know, we were you know, I saw her a lot when I was traveling on the WTA tour with the British girls. So I was a big fan of her in a number of ways. I always liked to watch players who were a little bit different, who were a bit unorthodox, and who made the absolute best of what they had. And for me, she was, you know, she had this kind of unusual, perhaps technically, forehand and this incredible backhand, but she was a clever player, and I always like watching players who really, you can see them using their brain and maximizing on what they have. So she was, and I know that if any of my players were playing against her, they hated playing against her because she made it so difficult for them. And that's always a compliment, I think, when other players say that about you. Oh, I hate playing her, you know. So anyway, I think when I saw her coming back, and I thought, oh, that's great. And I knew she would cause problems because of the way that she plays, and, you know, but yeah, there's, you know, there are a lot of mums on the tour now, and I think it's a great advert for the young players coming up, that your career doesn't have to stop when you maybe choose to start a family, that the tour can look after you, and that you can get back into shape and into playing, you know, getting your tennis game back again. I think it's a really great sign for women.
And final 3 questions. The first one is, what would you say was your break point?
I think the toughest time, tennis wise, the toughest time was, when Andy was training in Spain. Actually, financially was the hardest bit, because trying to find the money to make that happen. And I think any tennis parent will tell you the same thing. It's incredibly expensive to take a young player through, finding the right training environment if that doesn't exist in your country. It's like going to an expensive boarding school overseas that specializes in tennis. So actually those sort of 3 years, I think, between him being 15 and maybe 14 and a half to 17 and a half, those were the biggest challenges. I think it's a huge pressure on parents to financially support everything, and unless your governing body takes care of what it is that you do. So yeah, I think that definitely was the toughest thing was finding the money. And then we were very fortunate that Andy, by the time he was 18, he was in the top 100, and he moved very quickly from the juniors up the ranks in the seniors, and then he started to make some money, and we were able to use that money to invest in coaches, fitness trainers, physios, coach for significant chunk of the year, and fitness trainer, physio for part-time. Obviously you can't just suddenly create a big full-time team on a small and not guaranteed income, which tennis is never guaranteed. You never know what you're going to do each week. So I think that was the biggest stress.
Finish the sentence. People would be surprised that
I like dart.
Oh, darts, the sport. That's interesting. Yeah. And my final question is, if you can share with us a funny story or a moment from the locker room, whether it was when you were a player or with Jamie or Andy, what would it be?
I think one of the things I always remember from my career, which was short-lived. I played a tournament in Barcelona, and I played against Bjorn Borg's fiancée at the time, Mariana Simeonescu, and she beat me. And in those days, if you won the match, you bought your opponent a drink at the bar or in the restaurant afterwards. These things just don't happen anymore, but that was what happened back in those days. And I remember her saying to me, "Would you like a drink?" And I thought, yeah, that would be quite cool to go to have a drink with Bjorn Borg's fiance. And she said, "We have to go to the locker room first." And I said, "Oh, okay." So put our bags in the locker room and so forth. And she took out a cigarette, and she said, I just have to have a cigarette, and I have to have it, like behind closed doors, because Bjorn doesn't like me smoking. And I sat there talking to her while she had her cigarette. And, of course, some years later, they're married, and he's winning all his titles and so forth. And he, of course, became a superstar. And I always remember that, like that story. That was just quite amusing. And you just shows you how much the world has changed, and the tennis world in particular has changed from way back in my brief career of trying to play tennis.